Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
In this lecture, we are going to look at science and technology development in India since independence. See, as soon as India became politically independent in 1947, the question was, what path should India take to achieve economic development? So, one of the important points of discussion was, what role should science and technology play in our country's development? There was a debate between Mahatma Gandhi and Nehru and others. Gandhi in Hind Swaraj said he had a critique of modern civilization, including that of the West. He said the problem is greed versus need. He said nature has everything to satisfy our needs but not our greed. But the last 300 years of development in the Western countries have really development showed that the greed overtook the need of people. That's why we exploited nature without any limits. Unbridled exploitation of nature occurred, and this is against Gandhiji was reacting to this kind of development, which was driven by greed of accumulating money. He also had a critique of modern professions like doctors and lawyers. He said the modern professions like doctors and lawyers are out there to sort of mislead innocent people and make money out of their innocence. Decentralized economic activity, dignity of labor. Gandhiji advocated decentralized economic activity, dignity of labor, and most important values are Satyagraha, Swaraj and Swadeshi. Extremely important, he placed extremely, or he gave a lot of significance to things which are Indian. Satyagraha, Swaraj means Swaraj not only political in terms but also in terms of ideas, and Swadeshi means our own indigenous kind of ideas and indigenous kind of technology. Whereas the people like Jawaharlal Nehru and the other modernists, Jawaharlal Nehru argued that future belongs to those who make friends with science. Others, his colleagues, also saw the significance of modern science and technology in achieving economic development and social development. They saw modern industry as the most important means to achieve economic development, but debated on the scale of industrialization. Some people advocated small scale industries, some people advocated large scale industries. Mokshagundam Visvesvaraya, who was engineer by training, advocated industrialization as one of the important means for achieving economic development. The scientists who are already active in science, who are reputed not only within India but across the world, people like Homi Bhabha, he advocated that we must build finest scientific institutions that can contribute to theoretical knowledge, which later on perhaps could be used for developing technologies. M.N. Saha, another physicist, he said the problems of Indian science are the problems of India's millions. That is, science must address the problems of India's millions who are poor, they were devastated by the colonial rule. How do we sort of see that the poor people in the country have their 2 square meals a day and also join the development process? So his problem was more, M.N. Saha was focusing more on practical aspects or practical application of scientific knowledge to solve India's problems. This is a kind of debate that was going on. It was in this context that science and technology policy was shaped by political elite and the scientific elite. The goal of socialist pattern of society was set up by the parliament in 1952, and planned development to achieve that goal was introduced. 5-year plans were introduced. 5-year plans were institutional mechanisms to achieve these goals. Industrial Policy Resolution of 1948 and 56 This policy divided economy into three sectors: public sector, private sector and joint sector. Public sector industries were supposed to occupy the commanding heights and also be a role model for private sector and joint sectors. State actively was involved in industrial production. For example, iron and steel was produced by the state-run public sector units, and many public sector units were established in the area of shipbuilding and also in the area of producing aluminum and so on. So, state occupied an important place as a producer of industrial goods, not only as a provider of services, but also as a producer of goods. The Scientific Policy Resolution of 1958 was the first science policy that was formulated and announced by the Government of India under the leadership of Jawaharlal Nehru. Modern science and technology was seen as an important means to achieve economic, social and cultural transformation of Indian society devastated by the colonial rule 200 years. Lack of capital may be made up, according to the policy resolution, lack of capital may be made up by advancements in science and technology, that is by knowledge production and its application. The science policy resolution aimed at expanding the existing science and technology organizations and creating new ones to facilitate practice of scientific research by men and women in an ambience of freedom, in an ambience of free exchange of ideas. And one of the aims of this policy resolution was to see that the benefits of modern science and technology accrues to the majority of the population. That is, the knowledge that is generated and its applications should ultimately benefit the majority of the population in the country. So, it is in this context that R&D institutions were expanded. For example, India started expanding the existing councils, Council for Scientific and Industrial Research. It was modelled after the British DSIR, Department of Scientific Research and Department of Scientific and Industrial Research. Now, CSIR has over 40 national laboratories and employs over 6,000 scientists. ICAR is Indian Council of Agriculture Research, established in 1909, expanded after independence, dedicated to agriculture research, has nearly 30 institutions, it's more now, nearly 40 institutions of agricultural, animal husbandry, fisheries and so on. Indian Council of Medical Research for medical research has several laboratories across the country. National Institute of Nutrition based in Hyderabad, National Institute of Immunology based in Delhi. These are some of the major R&D institutions that we have in public sector, public sector R&D institutions, and add to this a lot of universities that we have, and universities also come under R&D institutions because they generate knowledge and some of them sometimes also generate patents. As I said, universities at present are over 700, public, central, state. In public sector we have central universities, state universities and deemed universities. In private sector, which is a recent phenomenon, more and more some of them enlightened people are starting universities. Many of them start universities not with altruistic or philanthropic ideas, but perhaps to make a profit. Future, we are going to have foreign universities in our country. Under WTO, education is a tradable service, so many foreign universities are trying to set up their campuses in our country, and we will have to see what's going to be the impact of these foreign university campuses in our country. I mentioned about CSR laboratories, ICR institutes and ICMR institutes. The industrial R&D consists of public in-house R&D, private in-house R&D and research foundations which are established by the industry, sometimes some philanthropic organizations. They also carry out research in our country apart from the universities. Industrial technology policy of 1960s and 70s. See, immediately after independence, the leadership of our country realized that we did not have technological capabilities and hence we had to import technology from other countries. So, that is how imports of technology was permitted. Later on, people realized that continuous imports are not going to help us because it's going to be expensive. Then they started import substitution strategy by developing substitutes for those developed in the Western countries or elsewhere. This actually technology imports and import substitution strategy have made us look to the West for technology for a very, very long time. So the indigenous efforts in technology development could not take off in the context of imports of technology and import substitution. In agriculture, we at the time of independence, agriculture productivity was very low and there were problems of poverty, hunger, and in order to overcome these problems, the Government of India invited Ford Foundation experts to suggest ways and means to improve agriculture production. They suggested this Green Revolution package consisting of high yielding varieties, irrigation, credit, chemical fertilizers and pesticides and mechanization. The Green Revolution package also required a certain size of land holdings, about 7 acres or so, and these conditions were met in states like Punjab and Haryana. That's how Green Revolution was initiated in these two states initially. So obviously there were some consequences of Green Revolution. The intended consequences was to productivity increased and volume of food production increased and productivity per acre of food grains increased. Mostly this Green Revolution was confined to wheat to start with and later on rice. Some of the unintended consequences which people never expected was number one, salinity of soil. Because of irrigation, large tracts of land became saline and overuse of fertilizers, pesticides and decline in soil health, pesticide residues in food and pesticide residues in soil were observed. Now there is a kind of a plateauing of productivity or production in agriculture, and that means the Green Revolution strategy has outlived its time. So we must think in terms of new ways of increasing agriculture productivity. So space and nuclear technology, India invested a lot of resources, especially in public sector research R&D laboratories. ISRO is one of our important R&D laboratory, R&D organization. ISRO has been instrumental in developing satellites and satellite launch vehicles, and some of the satellites were very useful for educational purposes, some were for weather forecasting and so on. Self-reliance achieved in the context of denial of latest technology by the advanced countries. That is, when odds are against us, we tend to do well, we tend to think, we tend to come out with alternative solutions. And today ISRO has developed capabilities to launch satellites not only of our own country but also other countries. Several useful byproducts came up during this development of space technology. Special materials, devices were developed. Capability to build nuclear reactors also we gained. We could become self-reliant in building nuclear reactors. And these two, agriculture, space technology and nuclear technology, were shown as important achievements of our country during the 1980s and so on. So in this context, in 1983, there was a technology policy statement that was issued by the Government of India. So this policy was announced against backdrop of increasing unemployment, environmental pollution, that is water, soil and air pollution, competition from the newly industrializing countries in the 1980s, that is Hong Kong, Taiwan and so on. So the strategy that was advocated in the 1980s was import technology in order to export products. So import in order to export was the slogan, which perhaps these newly industrializing countries also followed. So the policy advocated judicious mix of mass production and production by masses. And the objectives of this 1983 technology policy statement were number one, self-reliance was not seen as something that we should do everything. So self-reliance does not mean we do everything ourselves. To import technology in order to export, I just now mentioned. The judicious combination of mass production and production by masses, I just now mentioned again. And also the policy advocated environmental friendly technologies. So the recognition that already there was pollution of environment was brought into policy framework which advocated environmental friendly technologies, development of environmental friendly technologies. So we should also talk about one more thing which really helped India to do very well in pharma sector during till about even now. See, this discussion on Patent Act is important in the context of the current Patent Act. See, in 1972 we had a Patent Act which is called Process Patent Act, which enabled one to produce same product by using a different process. That means if somebody produced aspirin by using one process, somebody else can produce aspirin by using a different process. It does not infringe upon the rights of the first company which produced aspirin, because the other company used a different process. It contributed to the growth of pharma industry in our country. Today, India is one of the major producers of bulk drugs. So in 1990s, the situation started changing. Background is declining foreign exchange reserves in our country, credit from World Bank and IMF. See, these two institutions placed some conditions on the kind of credit they gave. They asked for structural readjustment, and this meant more increasing liberalization of the economy, privatization of the industry, and withdrawal of state from production. From the commanding heights of the public sector, the government slowly started withdrawing, and today we see that government is really getting out of this production. The state is really withdrawing from active industrial production. One should also say that also the liberalization of the economic policy has mixed results. On the one hand, it has opened up possibilities for investments, opened up possibilities for starting new industry. The so-called license Raj came to an end, and at the same time liberalization also created or enhanced the inequalities. There are studies which indicate that inequalities have gone up, inequalities have increased in the context of liberalization era. So one has to really look at what these studies mean and how do we really look at how do we solve the problem of inequality in our country, both economic inequality and social inequality. Globalization also, we are also now in the midst of the globalization process, a process that began during colonial time. It is not a new one. Globalization in the 1990s marked the beginning of movement of capital, that is finance capital across countries, movement of technology and cultural products across countries. The process, in combination with the structural adjustment programs of the World Bank and IMF and the WTO, challenged the nation state in most of the developing countries, nation states in most of the developing countries. On the one hand, there is economic liberalization. On the other, there is a WTO provisions on intellectual property rights, and also the structural adjustment programs that the World Bank and IMF insisted upon. So this, I think, created a situation where developing countries had to really change the course of their development. With liberalization, we no longer talk of a socialist pattern of society which we set for ourselves in 1952. So that's the kind of a major shift one can see. Now let's talk about WTO. WTO is a World Trade Organization which came into existence to actually to promote multilateral trade and also to see that the infringement of intellectual property rights do not take place on a large scale as it is happening across the world. So that's why they introduced notions like trade-related intellectual property rights, trade-related intellectual property rights. So under this condition, science, which was hitherto a public resource, has become an intellectual property. Earlier, one could access scientific knowledge without any problem. It was a public resource. It's a public, as it were, it's a public bank of knowledge. but today it's become intellectual property under the WTO. India became a signatory to the WTO in 2005, so Indian government also is trying to introduce a stringent IPR regime, intellectual property regime. India introduced institutional measures to in compliance with the WTO. Indian Patent Act of 1972 was changed to product patent regime. So in today's context, as I mentioned, in 1972 India had a process patent act under which if same product can be produced by two different groups or two different individuals by using two different processes, it did not amount to infringement of any rights. But today both product and process are protected by patent regime. So if somebody produces a new drug, nobody else can produce the same drug by using a different process. So both are protected, process and product are protected under the WTO regime on provisions of WTO provisions on IPRs. That means today we have to produce more and more novel products. We will not be able to get access to the technology that we used to get earlier from other countries, and it's going to be very, very difficult to get or import technology from other countries. Even if you import, it may be outdated technologies. So there is a lot of pressure on the country to produce novel things, to produce novel products. On IPRs, there are two views I must share with you. One view is that it encourages innovation. It is an incentive for inventors and innovators, because a patent means that one's ideas or one's invention cannot be copied by others, cannot be used without authorization by the inventor. It can only be accessed by paying a royalty or a license fee to the inventor. That means this acts as incentive for the inventors to do more inventions, because for the invention he made, he is being compensated or being paid by the persons who are going to use them. Another view is that it encourages monopoly control over knowledge and restricts access to knowledge. According to this view, what happens is, when somebody has a patent, each patent has a particular time period of validity. For example, it ranges from 17 to 20 years depending on the product. Some drugs have 17 years validity, some have perhaps 20 years. Now what the company does is, at the end of 17th year, it makes small change to the drug, and maybe it will add some vitamin or some kind of a small change, and say it's a new drug, and again they ask for patent for another 17 years or 20 years. This is what is called evergreening of patents. So companies have tried to do it. In some cases they were caught doing this kind of a thing, and their claims were dismissed by the courts of law, and this happens. Evergreening of patents also is a problem which one has to really address. So as I said, we have to produce novelties, novel products or processes, as both the products and processes are protected today. The WTO provisions have helped in some sectors, especially in pharma sector to some extent. New challenges or new ways of organizing R&D is extremely important now. Transformation of culture of the R&D organization also requires some attention. How do we change the R&D organizations to really change their values, change their orientations in accordance with the IPR regime today that we have. Increasing privatization of research process is taking place. What we see is that private research organizations, private corporations or multinational corporations see a lot of opportunities in the present context of the WTO provisions on IPR. So they have been investing a lot of resources to produce new products, and which the public sector R&D organizations are not able to do because of lack of funds from lack of funding from governments. And for example, let me give one example here. The BT cotton seed, which was developed by Monsanto company made enormous kind of profits by selling the BT gene for in different regions of the world. So that means one successful product can generate lot of wealth for a country. Improving quality of higher education is important because we say that our country is registering high rates of economic growth, but to match this economic growth, to provide support for this economic growth, we need high quality human resources which our education system must produce. Of course, there are issues in the area of education which requires a separate kind of a discussion, but what we see here is over time public institutions which once produced a large number of postgraduates and PhDs are underfunded now. They are really not able to recruit new faculty members, new scientists and so on. See, then we have a science and technology policy in 2003 which integrated science and technology. So earlier you have seen the first scientific policy resolution was called Scientific Policy Resolution. The second policy that came in 1983 was a technology policy statement. It appeared as if science and technology were separate, but today in 2003 it was recognized that they have to be integrated. So this S&T policy 2003 integrates science and technology, emphasizes on innovations, because we were already the context of knowledge production across the world changed because of the WTO. So we have to sort of bring in the idea of innovations into our policy actively, and emphasis on application of science and technology for social development. Social development will include healthcare and perhaps education and healthcare. And so in healthcare, what is it that science and technology can contribute to achieving healthcare for all in our country is a question that one has to answer. But we also see at the same time increasing privatization of healthcare, increasing number of corporate hospitals, and simultaneous decline of state funded hospitals, government funded hospitals. Science, technology and innovation policy 2013, after a gap of 10 years, again we have another new policy which integrates science and technology as earlier policy did. Now the policy recognizes places directly the idea of innovation in the text of the policy, and it integrates science, technology and innovation, which hitherto were seen in isolation. See, earlier policy was science and technology policy 2003, and today we are including innovation in a very direct way in the policy statement. So innovations have become important. The country has to really innovate in order to produce new products, processes. We will not be able to get new technologies, new products from outside as easily as we could do earlier because of this problem of patents. The key elements of STA policy 2013, one of the key elements is promoting scientific temper among all sections of society, enhancing skill levels for the application of science among young of all strata of society. See, this directly recognizes that scientific temper has to be promoted among all sections of society. In our earlier lecture, we have seen what scientific temper means, and scientific temper is a way of looking at the world. It's a application of logic and evidence to look at all the issues, and it also will lead to some kind of equality among people, because people recognize that everybody has a sense of logic. Everybody can see things by whether it makes logical sense or not. So if you recognize that, you recognize that everybody is endowed with power of reason, power of logic, so there is some kind of equality established. So we also look at issues, we don't go by what others say, we should look for evidence, whether or not a certain event has occurred or not, and judge for ourselves what we should do in a given context. But today what we see developments in our country, somehow the idea of scientific temper did not seem to have percolated down to every section of the society, every young person. So we see some of the developments which are not in accordance with the scientific temper. So we also should enhance skill levels for the application of science among young people of our country in different all strata. Now, second element of this STA policy 2013 is making careers in science and technology and research attractive enough for the talented minds, bright minds. That means we should attract people to basic sciences, we should attract people to pursue basic science and then research, so that they can come out with a new knowledge and which can be used to generate new technologies. See, we have also seen that in our education system over the last 10-15 years, too much emphasis was placed on engineering education. As a result, the enrollment in science disciplines has gone down, enrollment in social science has gone down, and today we are at a situation where even our engineering graduates are not able to get jobs. They are only, according to estimates of organizations like NASSCOM, National Association for Software Companies, only 20% are employable. The remaining people have to be trained, retrained to make them employable. So that means the quality of engineering education also has suffered. Similarly, admissions to the enrollment in basic sciences also suffered. So this is going to have some kind of impact on our ability to produce innovations in our country. Establishing world-class infrastructure is another key element of this policy. Establishing world-class infrastructure for R&D, for gaining leadership in select frontier areas. So the idea is to establish fine infrastructure for R&D, to do original work, to make original contributions, and also see that these original contributions are used for producing certain kind of products. Linking contributions of science, research and innovation with the inclusive economic growth agenda and combining priorities of excellence and relevance. Now, what this policy says is the contributions of scientific research and innovations have to be linked to economic growth, inclusive economic growth, and combined priorities of excellence and relevance. In the sense, scientific contributions must contribute to inclusive economic growth. In the sense, they should these innovations that we produce must be more inclusive, must be more useful to a large section of the people, and they should really have access to these innovations. And the focus, primary focus, I only have a few points I'm going to bring out, I'm going to mention from the document. The focus of the STIP, Science, Technology, Innovation Policy, has several kinds of points under focus, but I'll bring out a few. One of the important points is facilitating public sector investments in R&D in India and abroad. That is, facilitating private sector investments in R&D in India and abroad. That this one of the focus points is that private sector must be encouraged to invest in R&D in India and also abroad. Promoting the establishment of large R&D facilities in public-private partnership mode with provisions for benefit sharing. That means this policy encourages public-private partnership in producing R&D, research and development and innovations, and it also talks of benefit sharing if a research effort leads to a particular product, results in a particular innovative product. Treating R&D in private sector on par with public institutions for availing funds. This is an important policy. See, the private sector R&D institutions are also now taking or trying to seek funds from funding bodies, and there is now competition between private R&D institutions like some of the private engineering colleges, private universities, in trying to seek funds from funding institutions which earlier were funding only public institutions. Actually, public institutions, they do not have the kind of resources that private R&D institutions have, because public institutions like universities are faced with serious funds crunch, because they cannot raise the fees of the students, they cannot also get liberal grants from the government. Private sector institutions charge heavy fees and collect large fees from the large amounts of money towards the fees, and also they have other resources to invest. So the public institutions are really are faced with serious problems today, and their ability to produce original work is also becoming extremely difficult today. And the public sector institutions must be supported, because it is public institutions which provide access to a large number of young people who join the universities and who would like to pursue higher education, who would like to pursue research. And this public institutions must be encouraged to survive and also do well. So this one of the key elements is it emphasizes green manufacturing in the context of climate change, in the context of the emphasis on our ability to, the emphasis on adapting to climate change and mitigating consequence of climate change. We must move towards green manufacturing. The science, technology, innovation policy emphasizes the gender parity for more inclusive innovation system. It recognizes the importance of women's role in promoting innovations in our country. So one of the important means that the government seeks to use or utilize is foreign direct investments. As part of Make in India slogan, the government of India has been inviting foreign direct investment from companies abroad. The expectations are that these companies, when they invest here, multinational companies, when they invest here, they will transfer technology, they will increase investment, they will provide employment, and these are the expectations with which the government of India encourages foreign direct investment in our country. What exactly happens is something different according to some research. For example, what MNCs do is, see, they have production units in different parts of the world. They have integrated production system, and these units are located in different parts of the world, and these units keep exchanging the material, keep sending the materials which are useful in other location. So the company located in India, which sometimes sends some important components to another country, they call it exports. When they export the products not only to their units but some other units, they try to under invoice exports. In the sense, they quote very low price for the exports. That means they can reduce taxes on exports. Similarly, when the import from other units of other parts, they over invoice imports. If they import their products, some of the components from their own units in other countries, other locations, they over invoice imports. That means they charge more. They say that we are paying more for the imports. So they try to use this kind of methods to minimize the tax burden. Sometimes they also try to evade taxes under various pleas, and one of them is important fact is that they minimize taxes they pay to the host country, which thinks that the multinational companies can increase investment, they can pay taxes and so on. So there is this problem. This problem was recognized much earlier, and we'll have to see how the government addresses these questions. Technology and employment. See, indigenous industry, we must develop indigenous industry to increase employment potential. Increasing imports under the liberalized environment facilitated by the WTO has been acting negatively, has been a negative influence on the productive capacities of our small scale industries, productive capacities of our large scale industries. And this, because we have been importing from other countries, today we import quite a lot of items from China. Imports from China ranges from kitchen gadgets to solar panels. Micro, small and medium scale industries have to be encouraged. They provide employment on a large scale that can absorb our young workers who join the labor force at the end of the school education and so on. This small and medium scale industries have been recognized as the providers of large scale employment, and they also contribute to the equity. That means large number of people get jobs. So need for training in new industrial technologies, training in CNC machines. See, today's industrial technology has changed. It is no longer the industrial revolution vintage technology. We have moved into more and more electronics based industries, and so you need training in advanced machines. For example, computer numerically controlled machines will help in production of precision products which are used in electronics industry, used in automobiles, used in televisions, used in computers and so on. So I think it's very important to train our students on these new technologies. Young people who are in ITIs and who are in polytechnics, they must be trained on these missions so that their employment opportunities will increase not only in country but also outside. And today's challenge in agriculture is input costs have been going up enormously, plus they also the kind of pollution, soil pollution, water pollution has been increasing. Chemical based fertilizers and pesticides are unsustainable. They become unsustainable in the context of health and environmental reasons. Large scale dams have been seen to be causing environmental problems, increasing input costs. Agriculture has become very, very expensive. In one of our studies some time back we carried out in Andhra Pradesh, we were talking to farmers. They said agriculture has become unviable proposition, and they said, we asked why, if it is not profitable, not really, you are not able to make both, you are not achieving break even, forget about profits, why are you continuing? They said, where else can we go? There is no way they can go in search of alternate jobs. That is why they said, farmers said, we do not want our children to continue or get into agriculture, farming. We want our children to seek employment, industrial employment or employment in services and so on. So that is the kind of situation agriculture is in today. This requires serious attention. Response, see, because the chemical fertilizers, the cost of these chemical fertilizers and pesticides have been going up, in some situations farmers are turning to biocontrol agents to control pests, biofertilizers to increase soil fertility. In a way it is a blessing in disguise. They are moving more towards organic farming, avoiding these chemical fertilizers and pesticides. Number one, because they are expensive. Number two, they have been doing a lot of damage to the soil and human health. So we should also emphasize on dryland crops like millets. Today everybody talks of millets as important source of food which is more holistic, which can contribute to health, unlike rice, unlike consumption of rice, which can lead to a lot of health problems. And millets are seen today as an important alternative food for health reasons. Emphasis on low water consuming techniques of cultivation is necessary. For example, SRI, system of rice intensification, is a technique of cultivating rice with less water. Organic agriculture also is assuming importance because, number one, as I said, the cost of chemical inputs have been going up. So there is a report, IAA STD report, which is an organization which did a lot of research on this. Small size holdings, ecologically sound agriculture, or small size holdings can lead to ecologically sound agriculture rather than a big large scale farms. And today's context, genetic engineering technology has become important, and it also raised a lot of controversies because it is number one, proprietary technology. Number two, the very nature of technology has been opposed by people, has been seen as something unnatural, something which is not safe, something which is going to do harm to human health and also environment. And that's why we should move in towards open source innovations. They are not proprietary innovations. Everybody can have access to this at a lower cost, and see how to use the open source innovation model to produce food and, for example, healthcare products and so on. This is where we also should have a regulation of technology. For example, if somebody is using genomics based technology, what kind of regulations are important to ensure safety of these technologies for human health and also environment. So in our country we have seen earlier small is beautiful is a response, where a lot of people in the earlier era, I said, in the context of large scale unemployment, people said small is beautiful. You can have small organizations can employ more number of people, labor intensive technologies could be used. There is another movement called appropriate technology. This was a modern technology, but appropriate to the context. Appropriate technology did not mean traditional technology or inefficient technology, but it's a modern technology appropriate to the context. See, for example, application of science and technology for rural advancement of IISc did a lot of work on energy research, and they produced efficient, fuel efficient chulas, stoves, and Murugappa Chettiar Research Center in Chennai, C.V. Seshadri was the one who advocated appropriate technology. He also insisted that appropriate technology need not necessarily be less efficient technology. It can be modern technology appropriate to the context. See, we should invest a lot of money in solar energy and depletion of non-renewable resources, because we are facing the problem of depletion of non-renewable energy resources. We also faced with climate change, which means that we must develop adaptation mechanisms to climate change, and also in the long run see how to mitigate these consequences of climate change by shifting over to a new regime of production, industry and agriculture. We must produce green energy. Internationally, the US wants the shift to green technology, as they already have a lot of patents in this area. One way of staying as a superpower is by controlling knowledge. See, whatever you say today, when we move into this climate change adaptation, climate change mitigation technologies, already some technologies are developed, they are patented already elsewhere. So we also have seen environmental movements in our country which are against the kind of activities that are going on. For example, social movements to protect environment, the Silent Valley in Kerala, where people opposed the building up of a energy project there. The Chipko movement, which tried to protect forests from felling, they opposed deforestation. Narmada Bachao movement tried to protect the communities which were supposed to be inundated by the lower levels of the river when the dam was built. The communities would lose their environment, would lose their habitat, and all the kind of lifestyle that was built around this environment. The kind of culture that was built around this environment would be lost. That was the basis for this movement. And movements against mining in Orissa. Basically, the several movements as a reaction to the modern technology-based investments. So I mentioned small medium scale industries are very important in providing employment to large number of students. Innovations must be transferred to SMEs so that they grow in numbers and provide employment for the young population entering labor market at the end of 10th standard or 12th standard. Public-public partnership should be encouraged to leverage enormous human and physical resources that the public R&D institutions have built up over time. Somehow this was never focused by our government in terms of policy or in terms of a kind of a slogan to the public R&D institutions. There is a great deal of possibilities, there is a great deal of potential if public institutions start collaborating with each other to research and produce new products and processes. So the challenges, as I said, is one, how to make public sector institutions more innovative, One way is to encourage public-public collaboration. The last slide I would like to mention in this slide is, see, today agriculture growth rate should go up from the current 2% per year to 4% per year as envisaged by the new agriculture policy way back 2000. What kind of science and technology inputs can augment agricultural production to provide food security to 1 billion plus population in our country? This is a very, very serious question that one should see how our science and technology innovation policy will address this question. This is an important question to be addressed by the STIP 2013. Similarly, our manufacturing sector should grow at a much higher rate than the current growth rate. Only if you are strong in manufacturing sector, we will emerge as a strong economic power in the world. Science and technology have an important role to play to achieve these goals, and we should see how do we sort of channelize our efforts in science and technology to increase productivity both in industry and agriculture, industrial production and agriculture production. Thank you very much.